Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today's case is actually an unsolved case from the state I want to live in. If you know me personally, you know that I love Hawaii. I believe that Hawaii is a very beautiful state and I'd love to live there. So today's case is an unsolved case from Hawaii, and it's about Lisa O. So on January 20th, 1982, and by the way, this is older case of 1982. Lisa was only 19 years old and she had finished work at a hair salon. She was a stylist in Kailua. So walking out of the store, she told her co-workers that she was going to see her boyfriend, Doug Holmes, at the time, and she was going to go to his sister's apartment in Maikiki. On her way to his sister's apartment, she stopped for Poke for the occasion, and after she had dinner, she headed home to Kailua. She lived in Kailua and was headed home, but she never returned home. Like, she never made it home or anything, and no one would see her alive again. So the next day, on January 21st, Lisa's parents called Doug at his University of Hawaii dorm. They asked had he seen her and, like, did he know where she was. He said he didn't know where she was and that he had seen her the night prior, and that he told them that he would go look for her. And evidently, it was Doug Holmes that called the police to report that he had found her car. She drove a 1976 Toyota, and it was parked on the shoulder of a highway in Manawili, like I'm pronouncing that wrong, near the old Kailua drive-in. The driver's side window of Lisa's car was rolled halfway down, so about midway. And the officers that met Doug where her car was parked noted that there was about 2 to 3 inches of water on the floor and that the seat was soaked. The driver's seat was soaked. And crime scene techs would later determine that Lisa's car had been completely wiped clean of any evidence. I also forgot to mention this. Lisa's purse was in the passenger side completely dry, which made them suspect that somebody placed the purse in there after the fact. So word spread very quickly about Lisa's disappearance, and thousands of flyers were distributed island-wide. Her friends and family really hoped that she would be found alive, and even in interviews, Lisa's family struggled to thank hundreds of volunteers searching for their daughter. Her mother said, "Thank you is not enough. Everyone wants to help so much. The support has just been great." So the search for Lisa would go on for 10 whole days, and on January 31st, 1982, Lisa's nude and decomposing body was found in a ravine off of Tantalus Drive. That same day, the case went from the missing persons unit to the homicide detectives. And then a very significant HPD officer, Bert Cornell, got involved, and he is a big part of this case. He's a big help to this case. He, even to this day, says that if there's anything they need, he would go back to Hawaii in a heartbeat. He does not reside in Hawaii anymore, but he said he would go and help them. So days after they discovered Lisa's body, detectives had a suspect, and it was an HPD officer. So once their theory had become public, and by the way, I could not find this officer's name at all, and I do want to say he has been cleared of any wrongdoing, so there we go. So once this theory of, like, it being an HPD officer that killed Lisa, this caused, island-wide panic. Like, people on this island were freaking out. Women now feared that whenever a policeman pulled them over, it was because he was going to attack them, which is understandable. A lot of women still feel like that to this day. So what made them think it was one of their own? Well, Lisa had a temporary license, and that was missing from her purse. And, her window was rolled halfway down. It had been raining really heavily the night that Lisa went missing, and I did not mention that at the beginning of the video, sorry about that. It had been raining really hard the night before, so it makes sense that she rolled the window halfway down to hand him her license and registration. So in their minds, it just made sense that she had been pulled over and had passed her license to the officer. So the suspect's name was leaked to the public at the time, and another woman from the windward side claimed he had also pulled her over, and that he used his blue lights on his unmarked car. So these new details surrounding the fact that this officer had pulled over another lady in an unmarked car with his fender lights triggered more fear into women, especially into women, because now they feared that a routine traffic stop would be deadly. They genuinely feared that they would be murdered by an HPD officer that pulled them over for a traffic stop. So HPD did do their job of trying to reassure women that they didn't have to stop for unmarked police cars, and eventually HPD banned flashing lights on the car grills. This did not do much for the fear. So while all of this panic was going on about the being pulled over and all of that, investigators continued to focus on the police officer who was their suspect. The primary pieces of evidence against him were the woman that had come forward and said that he had pulled her over as well, and a sex harassment complaint against him from a young woman during a police ride-along. This suspected police officer also lived near Lisa's home. So they took all of this evidence to court. They took this whole buttload of evidence they had against this police officer to court, and it failed at the grand jury. And it tainted the case for Lisa. Trying to get answers for Lisa's family, Bert Cornell started his own investigation. He ended up being a private investigator years later. So Bert interviewed witnesses that he says detectives failed to track down or simply ignored. So he was going back and he was interviewing everybody he thought HPD kind of forgot about, or they just didn't go back, or they didn't want to track down. He went back and he got all these people. And he also found evidence that debunked the killer cop theory. So, like I said, Lisa had a missing temporary license. And that was a big part as to what made them think it was a cop that had done it. So Bert retraced Lisa's steps. So we know that when she left the hair salon, she went to get some Coke afterwards, and she had to show her ID in order to write a check. And she just so happened to leave her ID at this store that she wrote the check for. So after Bert located her ID, he turned it over to the police. So again, he was retracing her steps, so he went to her boyfriend's sister's apartment building, and he found a security guard who worked at this apartment building, which is where Lisa was last seen by anybody. So Thomas Thornburg was the security guard he found. He was not contacted by police until after Bert interviewed him. So Thomas told the police that he had seen Doug and Lisa arguing, and this was around 11 p.m. Lisa drove off first, and a little after Lisa drove off, Doug drove off after. Doug told police that he had gone back to his college dorm. Bert also tracked down another witness, Charlotte Kamaka, and she was a newspaper delivery driver. So Charlotte actually later testified before the grand jury about what she saw on the Tantalus in the hours after Lisa went missing. So keep in mind, the Tantalus is where Lisa's body had been found. Charlotte said she was on her regular route about 2:30 in the morning, and in the police records it says that she saw a man drive past her in a blue car with a female passenger who appeared to be asleep. So Charlotte said that what alerted her was that the female passenger's head just fell. When the car turned, her head just fell. If you've ever fallen asleep in the car, you know that you wake up if the car takes too sharp of a turn or anything. But she basically said the female passenger didn't wake up at all. So later she did say that she got a good look at the driver because he literally stopped and stared at her while he was trying on a paved lookout. This is weird to me because if you murdered somebody and you're about to drop them off here, why would you look at the car who was there? Who would literally be able to say, oh, it was this person or it was this person. And when she looked at this guy, she saw that the passenger, the female passenger, was nowhere to be found. After Lisa's body was found, Charlotte went to the police station and immediately reported what she saw. And she said that detectives wrote down information on how to contact her, but they never contacted her. And she kept contacting the police to see what they were doing, and her questions to them went nowhere. She didn't get any answers about Lisa's case, nothing like that. So another really big clue about Lisa's murder was her car. So there was an officer who was directing traffic around where Lisa's car was found, and he says he didn't remember seeing Lisa's car. But months later, he was asked to tell the grand jury that he did, and report that he saw a patrol officer at the car. This officer refused to lie and never testified. I do not blame him. Good thing for him for telling the truth. So, Lisa's case was not solved in 1982 or 1983 or 1984. And by 1985, 3 years after her death, the lead detective, Nelson Loom, wrote in a sworn statement that his massive and extensive investigation into her death had produced no evidence against a city employee acting within the course of their employment. In other words, a police officer didn't kill Lisa. So now the HPD has said that it wasn't a cop that killed Lisa, and we kind of figured that. So, in a recorded interview, Lisa's boyfriend, Doug, acknowledged that he was one of the suspects, which is just natural in any case they suspect the significant other, whether it be boyfriend, husband, girlfriend, or wife. So, court documents show that he agreed to take 2 polygraph tests. We all know polygraph tests are not the most solid pieces of evidence against somebody in court, but they definitely do help out a little bit. He failed both of these. And his explanation for failing both the polygraph test is that he felt guilty. For what, killing your girlfriend? Makes sense. In a sworn statement, Nelson, who was the lead detective at the time, said the explanation was good enough for him and he didn't have any other reason to suspect Doug. I'm just gonna say one thing. Doug is suspicious to me, bro. He is suspicious. So, as a lawsuit came out, and there was a part in it that was filed years after Lisa's death, Nelson was asked why other suspects weren't looked at more closely, and he said he did question Doug about the results of the lie detector test, and asked, why are you failing these? Doug's response was, he felt guilty. Doug felt guilty for not driving Lisa home that night in the heavy rain because she was an inexperienced driver. And later on, Nelson said that he didn't think Doug had any motive to kill Lisa because there was no third party involved and there was no baby coming. There was no reason for him to kill Lisa. But Nelson said that Doug did admit to trying to end the relationship with Lisa because he was going to college, he was being educated, he was being higher up, and Lisa was basically staying still where she was in life. She was perfectly fine where she was education-wise. She was perfectly fine with just working at a hair salon. Doug was like, nope, I want to go to school, do this. Cool, dude. You made it sound really douchey. But more than a year after Lisa's murder, she was exhumed. Her body was exhumed. Police took a look at her skull and her jawbone and asked the coroner in Los Angeles to do it because the Honolulu medical examiner could not do it. Like, they just couldn't look at these bones to see what there was. So, to determine her cause of death, that's what they were asking of this medical examiner in Honolulu. So, forensic anthropologist Robert Mann of the University of Hawaii said a human skull can provide so many clues, but a less experienced examiner, I think he meant coroner, could easily miss the signs. So, he's a forensic anthropologist. That's his job, to look at bones all day, every day. Congrats, dude. So by the time Lisa's body was exhumed, Bert had left the police department, and he had began working as a private investigator for Lisa's family to figure out what happened to Lisa, and I honestly applaud him for that. Good job, thank you. So he believed that the Honolulu coroner did not do a thorough job on the first autopsy, and he was right. When Lisa's body was exhumed, years after her murder, an investigator learned that her remains were still in the police body bag. There were still dirt and leaves and rubbish inside this police bag, because it was literally how Lisa's body was found. The body had never been cleaned. The evidence with the body had never been taken off the body. Nothing had been done, but they just thrown Lisa into a body bag and buried her that way. So, Bert says that the medical examiner was red-faced and embarrassed when he pointed this out. I'd be embarrassed too, dude, if my job had not been done properly, and I expected nobody to find out, and then this private investigator showed up and exhumed the body. So a second opinion was sought out by the Los Angeles coroner, and they took a look at the skull and jawbone, and the results of that exam were never made public, so it was never really said what happened to Lisa. But the coroner did say that the advanced decomposition of Lisa's body meant making any conclusions would be very difficult. I've watched every episode of Bones, and that's probably the only thing that they get right in Bones, is like, the advanced decomposition is really hard to get any evidence from, and I don't blame them. So Robert Mann, who was the forensic anthropologist, said he would be willing to take another look if he could have access to the jaw and skull. So there's a little problem with Robert Mann not being able to take a second look, because nobody knows where the skull and jawbone are now. HPD says that they were in the hands of the medical examiner's offices, but the ME literally said they returned it to the casket with the rest of the remains. So Lisa's family wondered, are the items, did they return our daughter's skull and jawbone? And the only way to be able that her skull and her jawbone are in her grave are to exhume her body again. So despite that being a very painful process for most families, thinking of your child, I cannot imagine being a parent or even a sibling, because Lisa does have a younger sister. I cannot imagine what they had to go through to tell and ask HPD again, can you re-examine our daughter's or sister's bones? They want to know now. It's mostly Lisa's sister. They want to know if newer technology and better skilled forensic anthropologists can finally determine how she died. Lisa's only living relative is her sister, May Lee McIntyre, and she literally says that if she got answers now, it would be a relief. It has been 40 years since her sister was murdered. She was only 7 years old, May Lee was. So May Lee stayed with relatives when her sister's body was found, and though there was an age gap between her and Lisa, she has very fond memories of her sister. I know how she feels. I have all of my siblings and I have a 20-year age gap between us, and I have 2 sisters that passed away, and I have very good memories of them, so I understand where she's coming from. So in the years following Lisa's death, her family sheltered her from the truth of what happened to her sister. And one day she came across the news clippings that her mother had kept, and she asked, what happened to my sister? Her mother told her. Even after that, Mei Lee and her aunt would visit Lisa's gravesite at the Valley of Temples, and they cleaned it, and they were leaving lei. If you don't know what lei is, I have some fake lei right here. This is a lei. I actually, funny enough, just got a lei from Hawaii because my grandparents just went. It's a fake one, but it's from Hawaii, so it counts. And so Lisa's father is actually buried next to her, and her mother is buried at the Hawaiian Memorial Park. The two of them separated and divorced in 1990, and Mei Lee says it was because of her sister's murder. There was nothing being done about their child's death, that it kind of just drove them apart. And now, it's been 4 decades. It's been 40 years since Lisa's murder, and Mei Lee just wants answers. She is basically at this point begging HPD to take one last look to see if this technology we have today, better MEs, better forensic anthropologists, somebody needs to help make this a case. So, there is no statute of limitations on murder. But the longer it takes for law enforcement to gather evidence, the harder it is for the case to move forward. And the case weakens quite a lot as time goes on. This case happened in 1982, and a lot of its witnesses are getting older. The mail carrier has actually died. She died at the age of 73. The security guard has died. But there are still some around, you know, the officer who was initially targeted as a suspect. The lead detective is still living on Oahu. And the retired officer who says he was asked to lie to the grand jury, he literally said he would cooperate. He would help in any future investigation. And Bert Cornell, like I said earlier, has literally said that he would come back at any given time to help solve this case. He lives in Florida, and he would be in Hawaii in a heartbeat if he could. But Doug Holmes, who was Lisa's boyfriend when this all happened, has been living in Australia. According to his LinkedIn page, he attended university in Hawaii, and then he moved to Melbourne, and he went to a college there, and he's an executive with an investment firm. So he's a pretty high power guy. So, funny enough, a few years ago, HPD made its cold case unit. There's a whole unit for cold cases, and HPD actually reopened Lisa's case, and the cold case unit is looking into it. They're looking into anything that may have been overlooked at the time of the case. Like I said, let's hope that new technology can help determine how she was murdered, how she died. Like, she deserves that justice. And HPD is pretty positive that somebody is going to come forward with information, because relationships change, and people sometimes want to clear their conscience, especially as they get older, and they just want to know if anybody knows anything about Lisa. And if you know anything and you are in the state of Hawaii, please contact HPD. If you live on Oahu, go to HPD. Like, Lisa deserves justice. That's all I can say. And reading this case, I couldn't imagine what her family and her little sister went through. So, if you know anything, please contact HPD. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of video, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!